Give me 1 second. Sorry. Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to HCI-space, a podcast where we explore the world of human-computer interactions through conversation with the people designing the future of how we live, learn, and connect with technology. I'm your host, Aditya Singh, and this week we're joined by Professor Jessica Vitak, who is a professor at the University of Maryland specializing in HCI. Hi, Professor Vitak, how are you?
I'm great, thanks.
Okay. So, I just want to start with general questions about, how you got into HCI. So, like, how did you get into HCI? Was there like a moment that really pulled you in?
So I don't think I knew what HCI was for a very long time in my studies. I was a communication and technology major and did my PhD at Michigan State, where I was in a program in a school of communications. And at that point, I got really into computer mediated communication, which is what in communication is closest to HCI, and that's mainly focusing on technology in an interpersonal scenario. So this is in the mid 2000s. This is when Facebook is really blowing up as a popular website. And I was really interested in how people were using technology as a mechanism to not just stay connected with existing friends, but to meet new people, to find people with other interests. I had been on AOL in the 1990s, so I was already familiar with this type of space. But as I began doing more research and meeting other people, I began to learn about conferences like CHI. So CHI is the premier HCI conference in the world, really, and started looking at that. And then I began my faculty job at the University of Maryland. And the University of Maryland is home to the oldest HCI lab in the country. So Ben Schneiderman, who is considered one of the godfathers of HCI, was there in the beginning of the launch of CHI. The year after the first CHI conference launched the Human Computer Interaction Lab at the University of Maryland. This is back in 1983. And when I came to Maryland, I got really involved with the HCIL. I've been assistant director or director of that for almost 10 years now at this point. So it was a rather curvy path to get there, but I find this happens with a lot of HCI researchers. I think the very traditional route is computer science, and then you want to bring in the people side of computer science. But I think a lot of us also come from more of the people side, and then want to bring in the technology piece of it. So that was my path.
I see. Very interesting. And a lot of people might not even know what HCI is. So can you explain it in a way that would make sense to a high schooler?
Sure. I mean, if you think about your relationship with your smartphone, at the most basic level, human-computer interaction is about your experience using your smartphone. So you probably have used apps that you're like, this is really clunky, this is hard to use, the buttons aren't where I would think they should be. User experience researchers, who are a big part of HCI, they're the ones who are figuring out what is the best way to design an app or a tool so that people can use it, that it's intuitive, that they're not going to get frustrated, that they're going to want to keep spending time with. So they do user studies. So they design a prototype. It might even just be a paper prototype. And then they bring in people and they have them kind of go through whatever version of that prototype, low fidelity, high fidelity, to be very nearly ready to go. And they basically have different approaches to which people can then try out things, give them feedback, and they can iterate and they can keep making it better. But anything, human-computer interaction, anything that's involving people and technology could potentially be human-computer interaction. A lot of research involving social media is human-computer interaction. A lot of the design of interactive tools, like apps, but also like games and other spaces, are human-computer interaction. Much more today, we have human AI interaction, so like a subset of human computer interaction, because AI is so big. So how do people use these systems? How can we improve these systems? What might How might people misuse these systems? Those types of questions are things that HCI researchers are asking of technology.
I see, yeah. And kind of bouncing off of that, I realized that in a lot of your papers, you talk about social networking apps and like Facebook and their balance with privacy. So kind of like diving deeper into that, I want to start off with like a kind of ambiguous question. It's like if you were to redesign social media platforms for teens today, like for TikTok, Be Real, or Threads, how would you help users help, their like showcase their real selves while feeling safe? So kind of like balancing with that privacy aspect.
Oh man, that's a really great question. And I don't know that I have a really great answer. But
Mhm.
I mean, I think probably lots of people your age have heard your parents talk about the past and how the past was better. I really do think social media was better in the past. So
I see.
when I remember when I first got on Facebook in 2006, and the early teen years when it was still relatively, and it was before it became so monetized and so focused on just pure, aesthetic and imagery and things like that. I think as those things moved in, they've had very detrimental effects on social media. So, uh, most apps like have lots of ads. That's not cool. People aren't being authentic, and while that's not a problem in and of itself, I think this kind of like belief that people online have like a perfect life is very damaging to people's mental health. And then I think there have been actually design elements to these platforms that have been really detrimental. And so like the one that comes to mind first is that the continuous never ending scroll. Like, so it used to not be like that, but the fact that you can never get to the end of content, that's designed in such a way to make you keep using the app. And so if we went back to the original, what I see as one of the original purposes of social media apps, that was connecting with friends and maybe connecting with friends you don't get to see in person that much, and then meeting people with similar interests.
Mhm.
Um, can we go back and recreate that? I don't think we can. I don't think there's any going back to this, like, time when a lot of the things that get talked about all the time in the news, a lot of things that people your age are experiencing with social media, like we can't get that to go away. So I think it's honestly thinking about, well, what's the new social media? What is the new turn on this? That it's something that encourages interaction and engagement, but can put aside a lot of the things that have been negative, the disinformation, these kinds of algorithms pushing people to problematic content, those types of things, negative impacts on well-being. How can we do that? In the end, though, you have people coming together. There's always going to be bullies. Those bullies existed before social media. They were just on playgrounds and not on YouTube. Um, people who are trolls or people who are spreading misinformation, those things have always existed. But the problem is when you have social media, you have the ability to make them much more visible, to spread much faster and much wider, and that's where these problems come around. And we can't get rid of that aspect of the internet. So if we think about, okay, maybe we don't need to be so perpetually online, I don't know. I would ask teens, like, what are the motivations that would encourage you to spend less time scrolling and more time, I don't know, hanging out in a physical space. I think you can't overestimate how important those types of offline interactions are. But with the pandemic and everything else, it really pushed everybody even more online than they were before. And I do think this has caused challenges.
I see. Yeah, and I think it's interesting that you said that earlier. Like, it used to be, like social media in general just used to be much more original. And now it's just so manufactured. And I totally agree with that. And I actually had a question for like these reels and these TikToks. Did you ever like, I don't know, like early on foresee that this might be such a like like a predominant thing among the youth, that like a 30-second video would hook them up so much, just endlessly scrolling. Was that something like you ever foresaw, maybe?
I mean, I feel like it felt like a slow train that you couldn't stop. So,
Uh-huh.
you could see it coming, maybe not too far in advance, but the changes were incremental but constant. And so, before smartphones, so the first iPhone came out in 2007. Before that, there weren't apps. You
Yeah.
know, people texted. It cost money to send a single text, often on most phone plans. And then we started to get apps, but they were really, really basic. And the technology had to evolve. And so the same thing when you look at the social media platforms, you take a place like Facebook, where in 2007 or around that time, I mean, people were just posting really mundane things, and that was novel and that was cool. It used to be your name is, and you were saying like what you were currently doing, and that was it. So like, yes, people would post pictures, great, but like, at that time video wasn't. And I think it just become something where the way the sites have structured themselves, the filters, all of these other things, the way reels work, and things like that, making it extremely easy for users, no matter how much technical skill they did, to be able to quickly upload something. And that's in part because it's so easy to record a video on your phone. Yeah, it's just something that I think, one, people are being very playful with, which is great. We love when people take technologies and they play with them and they find kind of unexpected uses for them. But then people really started leaning into kind of the aesthetics and the like, how do I get the likes? How do I get the upvotes? Whatever, on whatever platform it is. And to me, that's when the kind of like joy and discovery and all of these kind of like fun experiences, because they all end up turning to money. And then it's not about the connection or the experimentation. It's about, what do I need to do to, do things to make money, to get sponsorships, whatever it is.
I see. Yeah. So basically, just like social media in itself just became like a passage to make money, and that's why, it's not as like original or like cool as it used to be.
I
But
mean, there are spaces online that are
Mhm.
probably still really cool and fun and have that kind of energy about them. But I find that they are becoming increasingly rare.
Mhm.
And it's an unfortunate consequence of the power of capitalism in the U.S. and
Mhm.
globally, but especially in the U.S. is that everything in the end comes down to money, and that's not what social media was about when it started. It's about connecting people.
Mhm. I see. Yeah, so diving into our next question, there is a paper where you were teaching kids how to learn privacy without, directly telling them the consequences of leaking information. Do you think you could explain more about that paper?
Sure. So this was a project that was funded by the National Science Foundation, and in it we had found that there were a number of resources out there for older kids. So certainly people in high school, and to a lesser extent kids in middle school, that started to address issues of privacy and security. They were largely absent from younger kids, so elementary school kids. But at the same time, elementary school kids were increasingly using technology, not just at school, but certainly at home. And so the question became, if we're putting these kids in a position where they're using technology that might be collecting data about them and using that data in various ways, that is the time to start having the conversation. And so we did a series of studies. It was about, I don't know, 8 to 10 studies over 6 or 7 years with this project to understand different stakeholders' perspectives. We talked to teachers, we talked to and schools, we talked to students, we talked to parents. We found that parents of elementary school kids were like, actually, the teacher can figure that out. And then teachers are saying, well, we don't have that training. And it was very much of a situation where they were nervous about that. But then we began developing curriculum. And the challenge with that curriculum is how do you make it resonate with young kids? You know, if you're an 8-year-old and I want to talk about privacy and security concepts, how do I do that? So we really focused on developing curriculum that was focused on life relevant experiences, life relevant learning. We gathered a lot of data from elementary school children about the types of things they were seeing in their life, found that there actually are a lot of examples that you can pull from. The important thing, though, when you're developing any type of curriculum for kids this young is it has to be really carefully scaffolded, meaning you have to be, you know, you can't just dive into the deep end of like what these concepts mean. You got to start very, very basic when they're young, reiterate those concepts and slowly build as they are going through school, always keeping in mind developmentally where they're at. You know, can you actually have these conversations with a kindergartner? You can. It's going to look a lot different than you have with a 5th grader, which is going to look a lot different than you have with a high school senior. And so we developed curriculum, we've tested in schools, we've published a lot of the curriculum, we've built some games. But the kind of key takeaway here is people, I think, aren't realizing quite yet that that is an important aspect of digital literacy. Digital literacy has often just focused on, for kids, has often just focused on things like stranger danger, you know, don't give out your personal information, leaving it at that, and you know, basic typing, internet use skills. They really, to be successful in their lives and to avoid a lot of the privacy risks that are out there, people trying to steal their identity, you know, they're going to have bank accounts eventually, those types of things. We want them to become digitally literate in these topics as early as possible, and so that they're comfortable and confident when they are exposed to various situations. We see this, you know, the kind of like alternate to this with older adults who are among the most targeted for scams and things like that. And they don't have as much of an opportunity to be learning about these things. They're obviously many years outside of school. And so they are often falling for these scams. We don't want kids who are frequently online have a lot of opportunities to be exposed to these things. We want them to know how to identify and respond to those risks and protect their data in smart ways.
I see. And do you think you could give us an example of like how you would approach, I don't know, like maybe explaining to like an 8th grader or like a middle schooler, like, you know, these privacy concerns?
Yeah, so give me a sec to think through this.
Sure.
Well, so for middle schoolers, there actually are a fair number of resources. Google has developed a really good set of resources and games that they have come up with. I forget what the name of the resource is, but it's like Deep Privacy Awesome or something like that. Mm-hmm. Common Sense Media also has a lot of things. But I think with, you know, I was talking about this as it applied to elementary school children, but for middle schoolers, think about what actually resonates with kids that age, what matters to them. If you're coming, well, one thing we found is that kids at that age are much less interested in social media than kids a long time ago, like 10 years ago were. And like they're mainly saying like, I don't like that my parents are always on social media when we talk to kids about this type of stuff. So like maybe the angle is not social media. You got to figure the proper in that's actually going to resonate with the kids. It's going to make them pay attention. It's going to make them think, oh, this does actually apply to me. This isn't something for like when I'm grown up. This isn't something for other people. And so I think that kind of careful tailoring is really important, and recognizing that it's going to vary across ages significantly, and probably, you know, other characteristics of kids, there's going to be differences in what works and what doesn't. So you don't want to be tone deaf. You don't want to be talking about things like financial fraud to a middle schooler. Why would that resonate with them? Like, they don't have bank accounts in all likelihood. So what will resonate? Okay, you know, if it see, this is going to show how out of touch I am with these things. You know, is it Fortnite skins? You know, whatever it is, is going to really resonate with them. That's what you need to tap into.
I see. So basically, I know. I think I know what you mean. So, for college students, or like maybe like people who are like in their 30s or 40s, then it would probably make sense for them to kind of know about these like bank accounts, like slash fraud type of scams. But then going back to high schoolers and middle schoolers, it should be more of like scams that are predominant in their demographics in like maybe video
Sure.
games or something.
Yeah, or I mean, I think a potential privacy threat that applies to a lot of high schools involves, sexting or like
Mhm.
digital imagery, like which now AI is coming into play. And so, being aware that, for example, using something like Snapchat, and if you're sending pictures to a boyfriend or girlfriend through Snapchat, and that does not, the idea that it's ephemeral is not 100% guarantee. Somebody can have their another camera and be watching it and take that. They can, in some cases, take screenshots, those types of things. And so, kind of being more savvy about if I am sharing information with someone else, and this could be a friend, a family member, a stranger, whatever. Understanding what the potential consequences is and kind of being able to walk down those paths. Well, how could this go wrong? And that's harder to do. It's not like we're born being able to know how to think about all of these options. So you actually need to like train your brain to do that. And so I think that type of uh, curriculum or any type of like educational resources is really important. It applies to everybody too. I think that you need to be doing those types of things with, grandparents and also, but um, people often overestimate their understanding of how technology works, or they inherently trust. If a platform says that the content is ephemeral, that it'll disappear, they're like, well then, that they just stop, questioning it at that point. When they should still be asking questions. Well, what are ways in which this could come back to hurt me?
I see. Yeah, and that brings me to my next question. What do you think are some ways we can build trust with people and technology?
So are we building trust with other people we know, or you're saying like build trust with the technology itself?
Yeah, just like with how can you like trust another person on the internet and like be, sure they're not scamming
Okay.
you or yeah.
Yeah, that's hard because even now, it doesn't have to be a stranger. It could be somebody impersonating a friend, and that kind of thing has gotten easier. It's easier to kind of generate content that looks realistic when it isn't. I think for this may not apply as much to teens, but for people in their 20s, 30s, and beyond, anytime you get a text message or an email that's like, click this link to verify your account, to do this type of thing, like you should always be questioning that. You should always be looking carefully at that for anything that would signal it's not authentic. And so, like, if you get an email that a lot of like phishing and other ways to get data from people, there are very clear patterns, and it's just they play on things like urgency. It has to happen right now. Um, it looks really realistic, but there's small things that you can do, like looking at the sender email, which a lot of people just don't like they're doing that every time they get an email. If you're getting stuff on social media, like I certainly would be skeptical anytime somebody messages me from an account that I'm not connected to and is like asking me personal questions or something like that, or being like saying they know who they are. Like if it's somebody claiming to be my friend, I might text them and say like, I'm getting this message, it says it's from you, but you know, uh, I think my best advice is be skeptical, like always be skeptical. And that's just a good approach, because what's the worst thing that's going to happen? Your friend's like, yes, that's me messaging you. Like, why aren't you responding? And versus, you then give them information and they have more kind of, malicious intent because it's actually a stranger.
I see. Yeah, and yeah, for that question, like every professor just says to be skeptical about the people around you, and I totally agree with that. But
Yeah,
yeah,
it's not the way I think we want to live, but I think because the difference is that in an online environment, it's very easy to fake different types of cues and to be able to, pretend you have XYZ, that you are this person. All these things, they're just much easier to do in an online space than it is in person. Obviously, people do this in person too, but when it becomes that much easier, unfortunately, that means you need to be more questioning and more skeptical of whether this person is who they say they are, whether they actually have good intent, and err on the side of being more skeptical, demanding proof, whatever it takes to change that.
Yeah, absolutely. And just coming back to more general questions, like, is there any interesting research you want to talk about that's, exciting for the future of HCI, or something maybe that worries you?
I mean, AI worries me a lot.
Okay.
Uh, I am definitely skeptical of AI. I think AI has a lot of potential for good uses, but we're in this time period where everybody thinks it's going to solve every problem known to man. And I think we are putting too much trust in AI. I just don't think, I think we should be more skeptical of it and what it can do, and whether the things it can do, even if it can do them well, that's necessarily a good thing. Because if for example, you are writing college essays and you are just throwing any types of like questions as a prompt into ChatGPT and then copying and pasting the answers into it, that might not negatively impact you in the short term. But if that then becomes the trend where you aren't developing those critical thinking skills, you're not really using that, strengthening those muscles in your brain, what you're going to see is maybe not right away, but down the line, it's going to catch up to you. Because a lot of the skills that I think people, and not just young people, I think people in general take for granted or kind of see as lesser skills, it's because they don't see how important they are in just your day-to-day work and interactions, like regardless of the field you're in. If you're not able to respond on the fly to somebody because you need to go back and consult with a Gen AI tool to get ideas, like that's doing yourself a disservice. And so, there's a big push for incorporating AI into basically any type of technology. What I want is for HCI researchers to be really critical of this push, and to not just be thinking about from a usability perspective, is this good, is this useful, but also taking that step back and saying, from a societal perspective, how might this be problematic? And I don't think that's a core tenet of HCI, but I think it should be. I think we should be, anytime we are designing systems or artifacts or apps or whatever, we need to be engaging in this reflection on how that could benefit society, how that might harm society. And the answer shouldn't be, well, as long as there's some benefit, it's okay. I think one of the hardest things for some researchers to accept is that there are technologies that just should not be developed. I've heard examples of algorithms that were developed 10, 15 years ago. There's a really well-known one that's colloquially called the Gaydar algorithm. And in this, I think it was Stanford researchers, they built up this big database of photos based on like profile photos on social media. And then they trained the algorithm to determine, is this person gay or straight, basically, like really, really oversimplified it. They never took the time to think about how an algorithm that can detect one's sexual orientation could be problematic. Mm-hmm. And they might have said, well, our job as a computer scientist or an HCI researcher or whatever is to see how accurate we can get it. That's all we're interested in. And in my opinion, as researchers, we can't just stop there at building like the best tool, most accurate, most efficient, whatever our metrics are for deciding that. We need to be thinking about the larger potential for societal impact. And I think that's not happening with AI a lot right now. And I think HCI researchers are in a good position to be that critical voice saying like, oh, wait, do we really need to incorporate AI into this learning tool, into whatever, everything? And so, yeah, I think that's what I want to see HCI researchers doing more of, being that critical voice and not just saying like, oh, cool, new technology, like as if the development itself is what makes it worth doing.
Yeah, see, and I agree with that because I feel like right now a lot of like almost everything that can be like I don't know turned into AI or be automated is being automated, and I do think there should be room for like people to say, is this really necessary to be like automated, or is there really
Mm.
for AI to be used in this specific tool? And most of the time, there's not a reason. So I definitely
Yeah.
agree.
I mean, one of my current PhD students is doing her dissertation right now, and she's interested in this idea of privacy negotiation. So the idea here is think about smart devices, smart speakers, smart cameras, doorbells, all of these types of things. Data, they're constantly collecting data, and they're collecting a whole bunch of data. And then you have environments like you go stay at an Airbnb, or you are pet sitting for a friend or whatever, where that data is being collected, but you aren't able to control the device. You don't own it. You might want to be able to have some kind of negotiation, like, hey, when I'm over, is it okay if I unplug the speaker or whatever it is? And one of the things in her dissertation that she's really focusing on is there is an increasing push for automating these types of decisions, but these are inherently human social problems that require conversations that are often awkward. They require kind of this sharing of experiences, trying to help the other person understand where you're coming from. And so, one of the takeaways from her dissertation research is that like not everything can or should be automated. We shouldn't just offload things that are hard to do to technology when that may or may not give us a satisfactory outcome. And the better solution is we teach people how to like have these hard conversations, how to talk about what their concerns are, or why they do use cameras or whatever they're doing, and then to reach some kind of consensus that way. And it seems like it's potentially more time consuming, definitely harder, maybe something that a lot of people don't want to have that type of conversation. But in my opinion, a lot of times, not all the time, but a lot of the time, that is the better approach. And that's the more human approach. And that's the one that I think can lead to us having better outcomes and honestly better relationships if we're able to engage in those types of conversations and not offload it to technology. Not break up by like some random text, like actually talk to the other person about it. I mean, there's actually a lot of research on, the increasing role of technology and relationship, like formation, breakups, and all of that kind of stuff. Like, I'm sorry that you shouldn't just offload stuff to technology because it's hard or it's awkward or you're uncomfortable. I worry about us not experiencing those types of emotions because that is a really core part of being human, and technology should never replace that.
I definitely agree with that because I mean, like I myself, I think I'm kind of a victim to that because with like the help of I can like do tasks a lot faster and I don't have to think as much, but that's honestly kind of bad in the long term because I'm not really, learning how to be resilient, how to non procrastinate, and how to actually like critically think. I'm just kind of offloading it into,
Yeah,
this AI tool that would just do it for me. So I definitely agree with that.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, just to wrap up this episode, if you could give any piece of advice to young people interested in technology, what would it be?
So if you're interested in kind of what HCI is all about, I think taking like and you go to college for it, like take diverse classes. Like you want to take things that are more on the computer science side, but you definitely want to take things more on the social science side. HCI, historically is known for bridging computer science and psychology. Now it's all in today's day and age, it's pulling from a whole bunch more fields, but kind of like being able to understand problems as not just technical or not just social, but at that intersection comes from, I think, a diverse kind of education. So I do see a lot of students these days who, at the University of Maryland, we have a tremendously large computer science department. And a lot of them, they are very narrowly focused and thinking, okay, I just need to take programming courses and these CS courses. Everything else doesn't matter. It's not worth it. And I really think the benefit of engaging with all of these different perspectives really helps you better understand what the problems are that HCI researchers are doing, because those problems are inherently a combination of many factors. If you think about usability of systems, maybe you're just focusing on how to help certain people do, but accessibility research is all about, like, these are the people who are left out. And so, like, having those multiple perspectives and how you think about what the problem is, or what problems may come up, and then what those solutions might look like. I think that will make you, much in a much better position to actually have an impact, whether you become a UX researcher or you're just building apps. If you have that kind of perspective versus just kind of narrowly focusing on, for example, like how to build a really good app, good tool, whatever, like that's going to benefit you in the long run. And I think, for people who are interested in this, who are in high school or college, like just reaching out and talking to people who work in the field, because HCI is an incredibly diverse field. I'm in academia, but HCI researchers are operating in all kinds of fields and all kinds of industries. And so kind of understanding that the diversity of what makes up HCI is a really good idea, because that might help you understand what you want to pursue and where you might take your career.
I see. Thank you so much for that advice. And yeah, thank you so much for joining us on this episode. Do you have any last words?
No, I'm glad you're doing this. It's great to see folks who are interested in HCI in high school. This is a field that I didn't know existed when I was in high school. So I'm glad to see that there are people like you who are trying to help spread news about this, which I think HCI is a really exciting field. So yeah, it's great.
Absolutely.